Trump's tariff plan, genius or chaos? In the spring of 2025, the global economic landscape shuddered under the weight of a bold and polarizing policy, President Donald J. Trump's sweeping tariff plan. With tariffs targeting major trading partners like China, Russia, and even allies such as the UK, Trump's second term has ignited a firestorm of debate. Is this a masterstroke to revive American manufacturing and restore economic sovereignty, or a reckless gamble that risks plunging the world into a trade war and economic chaos? The stakes are high, the rhetoric is fiery, and the world is watching. This narrative dives into the heart of Trump's tariff strategy, exploring its origins, impacts, and the global reactions that could shape the future of international trade. The genesis of Trump's tariff vision. Donald Trump has long been a self-proclaimed tariff man. His affinity for tariffs as a tool of economic policy was evident during his first term, 2017 to 2021. When he imposed levies on steel, aluminum, and a range of Chinese goods, citing national security and trade imbalances. Those policies, while controversial, set the stage for his 2025 agenda, which is far more ambitious and divisive. Upon re-entering office in January 2025, Trump wasted no time, announcing tariffs that would dramatically reshape U.S. trade policy. By April, the average U.S. tariff rate had soared from 2.5% to an estimated 27%, the highest in over a century, with some countries facing rates as high as 145% on specific goods. The rationale behind Trump's tariffs is rooted in his belief that the U.S. has been exploited by unfair trade practices for decades. He argues that countries like China, with their state-subsidized industries and currency manipulation, have hollowed out American manufacturing, leading to a goods trade deficit exceeding $1.2 trillion in 2024. Trump's narrative is simple. Tariffs will level the playing field, bring factories back to American soil, and protect workers in places like Ohio and Michigan. He frames access to the U.S. market as a privilege, one that other nations must earn by aligning with American interests on trade, immigration, and even drug enforcement, particularly regarding fentanyl. To understand the genius or chaos question, we must first unpack the mechanics of Trump's tariff plan. In February 2025, he signed executive orders invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, to impose a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico and a 10% tariff on China, effective February 4. These were justified as responses to illegal immigration and the fentanyl crisis, which Trump declared a national emergency. By March, the tariff on Chinese goods doubled to 20%, and by April, it skyrocketed to 145% for some products, though a 90-day pause was later announced for many other countries' tariffs to allow negotiations. Steel and aluminum tariffs were doubled to 50%, and a 25% levy was slapped on imported cars, with additional tariffs proposed for pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. The UK, initially spared higher rates, faced a 10% tariff, while the European Union was threatened with 30% duties starting August 1, 2025. Trump's approach is not just about economics, it's a political statement. He positions tariffs as a weapon to force compliance, whether it's China cracking down on fentanyl precursors or Canada tightening border security. His rhetoric, often delivered via Truth Social posts or White House briefings, is unapologetic: be strong, courageous, and patient, and greatness will be the result, he declared in April, urging markets to stay calm amid plummeting stocks. But as the world grapples with the fallout, the question looms: is this a calculated strategy or a chaotic overreach? The case for genius: rewriting global trade. Proponents of Trump's tariff plan argue it's a bold, disruptive move to reset a global trade system that has long disadvantaged the U.S. They point to the economic logic of protectionism in a world where America's open markets have been exploited. The U.S. has one of the lowest average tariff rates globally, 2.2% before 2025, while countries like India, 12%, and China impose higher barriers. Trump's reciprocal tariffs aim to match or exceed these rates, forcing trading partners to negotiate fairer terms or face economic pain. As one ex-post put it, it's a bold, calculated strategy to reset the global economic order and force the world to play by new rules set in Mar-a-Lago. The economic argument hinges on three pillars: revenue generation, job creation, and supply chain resilience. First, tariffs are a significant source of federal revenue. By July 2025, they accounted for 5% of U.S. federal revenue, up from 2% historically, with estimates suggesting $1.9 trillion in additional revenue over a decade from IEEPA tariffs alone. This influx could fund domestic priorities like infrastructure or tax cuts, aligning with Trump's campaign promises. Second, tariffs are designed to incentivize manufacturing to return to the U.S. By making imported goods more expensive, companies like Apple, which Trump threatened with a 25% tariff unless iPhones are made domestically, might relocate production. General Motors, for instance, announced plans to increase U.S. production in response to auto tariffs. Third, tariffs aim to reduce reliance on foreign supply chains, particularly from adversaries like China. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed vulnerabilities in global supply chains, and Trump's team argues that tariffs will bolster national security by encouraging domestic production of critical goods like semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. The AFL-CIO and Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown have praised tariffs for supporting steel plants in Ohio, suggesting bipartisan appeal for protecting industrial heartlands. Supporters also highlight Trump's deal-making prowess. His 90-day tariff pause for most countries, except China, in April 2025 was framed as a strategic retreat to lure allies like the UK and Vietnam into favorable trade agreements. The UK secured a temporary exemption from higher steel and aluminum tariffs, and China agreed to a 90-day deal lowering tariffs on U.S. goods to 10% in exchange for a U.S. reduction to 30%. These moves, proponents argue, show Trump using tariffs as leverage to extract concessions, much like his first-term negotiations with Mexico on border security. As one ex-user claimed, Trump baited China into overplaying while rallying allies quietly. Now China's boxed in, high tariffs, no global support, and shrinking leverage. The genius narrative paints Trump as a disruptor who sees what others miss, a world where America's economic dominance can be restored through sheer force of will. By targeting China's unfair practices. Like intellectual property theft and state subsidies, Trump aims to isolate Beijing economically while coaxing allies into better trade deals. His advisors, like Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, argue that China's imbalanced economy makes it vulnerable to sustained pressure, especially on issues like fentanyl. If successful, Trump's tariffs could rebalance global trade, revive American manufacturing, and cement his legacy as a dealmaker who reshaped the world economy. The case for chaos, a global economic storm. Critics, however, see Trump's tariffs as a reckless gamble that could trigger a global trade war and economic disaster. The scale and speed of his 2025 tariff hikes, unprecedented since the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, have sent shockwaves through markets and supply chains. The S&P 500 plummeted nearly 5% on April 3, 2025, its worst drop since June 2020, as allies and adversaries alike scrambled to respond. Oil prices fell to $56 a barrel, signaling fears of a global slowdown, and the International Monetary Fund downgraded its 2025 growth forecast, warning of a U.S. recession. Former Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen called the tariffs the worst self-inflicted wound on a well-functioning economy, noting that the average tariff rate is now the highest since 1934. The economic fallout is multifaceted. First, tariffs are a tax on consumers. The Tax Foundation estimates that Trump's tariffs will cost U.S. households an average of $1,200 in 2025, with some projections as high as $2,600. Goods like French brie, Chinese toys, and Canadian lumber are already more expensive, with companies like Adidas and Mattel passing costs to consumers. A high-end iPhone could cost $2,300 if Apple absorbs the full tariff burden. Second, tariffs disrupt supply chains. The closure of the de minimis loophole, which allowed duty-free imports under $800, has cratered businesses like Shein and Temu, which relied on low-cost Chinese goods. Automakers like Stellantis are laying off workers and closing plants in Canada and Mexico due to auto tariffs. Retaliation is another major concern. China has imposed 84% tariffs on U.S. goods, targeting farm products like soybeans and pork, hitting Republican-leaning agricultural states hard. The EU, initially hesitant, approved retaliatory tariffs after Trump threatened a 50% levy in June 2025. Canada, despite exemptions, faces 25% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos, prompting Prime Minister Mark Carney to promise countermeasures. These tit-for-tat actions risk a full-blown trade war, with the World Trade Organization warning that a U.S.-China decoupling could severely damage the global economy. The legal and political chaos adds fuel to the fire. In May 2025, the U.S. Court of International Trade ruled that Trump's use of IEEPA for broad tariffs was illegal, though an appeal kept them in place. Critics argue that Trump's invocation of national emergencies for trade deficits or fentanyl stretches the law beyond its intent. Within his administration, tensions are evident. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick warned of market turmoil before the April Liberation Day announcement, clashing with hardliner Peter Navarro, who pushed for 25% across-the-board tariffs. Elon Musk, a key advisor, publicly criticized Navarro, advocating for zero tariffs with the EU. This internal discord, coupled with Trump's erratic policy shifts, like the 90-day pause, has sown confusion, with markets reeling and businesses delaying investments. Global reactions underscore the chaos. Germany's economy minister warned that Trump's tariffs could reduce GDP growth by 0.2% annually, while India faces $7 billion in annual export losses. Taiwan, hit with a 32% tariff, fears economic isolation amid Chinese military pressure. Even small economies like Fiji worry about collateral damage from a global trade war. The Bank of England has signaled sharp corrections in markets, and JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon warned of stagflation, a toxic mix of high inflation and stagnant growth. As one ex-post lamented, Trump's tariff stunt is a reckless gamble, putting jobs and global stability at risk for a political flex. The global ripple effects. The tariff's impact extends far beyond U.S. borders, reshaping alliances and economic strategies worldwide. Let's examine the effects on key players: China, Russia, the UK, and others. China, a targeted foe. China is the primary target of Trump's tariffs, facing a 145% rate on some goods by April 2025. Beijing has retaliated with 84% tariffs on U.S. exports, escalating tensions in what some call a complete decoupling of the world's two largest economies. China's Commerce Ministry condemned the tariffs as self-defeating bullying, warning of damage to global supply chains. Yet, China has also pursued strategic maneuvers, strengthening ties with Europe and Asia to offset losses. The closure of the de minimis loophole has hit Chinese e-commerce giants hard, with Shein's business model facing collapse. Interestingly, some companies are doubling down on China as a manufacturing hub, wary of diversifying to countries like Vietnam, which now face 46% tariffs. China's diplomatic charm offensive, portraying itself as a stable alternative to Trump's chaos, aims to win over allies like the EU. However, the tariffs have exposed China's vulnerability. The U.S. accounts for 14.7% of its exports, and a sustained trade war could cripple its economy. Trump's focus on fentanyl as a negotiating chip adds pressure, with advisors like Bessent urging China to crack down on precursor chemicals. Russia, a curious exemption. Russia, surprisingly, has been spared direct tariffs, as Trump argues existing sanctions are sufficient. U.S. imports from Russia were $3 billion in 2024, small but significant compared to countries like Lesotho, which faced substantial levies. A proposed 500% tariff on countries trading with Russia, floated by Senator Lindsey Graham, would indirectly hit China but has not been implemented. Russia's ability to impose unilateral measures gives it flexibility to retaliate if targeted, but for now, it remains a bystander in Trump's tariff war. The UK, a reluctant ally. The UK, a close US ally, secured a temporary exemption from higher steel and aluminum tariffs after negotiations in May 2025. However, a 10% baseline tariff still applies, and the threat of 30% EU-wide tariffs looms. Downing Street expressed relief at avoiding steeper rates, but the Bank of England warned of intensified risks to the UK economy, with potential sharp corrections in markets. The UK's temporary deal reflects Trump's willingness to negotiate with allies, but the uncertainty has chilled business confidence, with luxury and mining sectors bracing for a downturn. Other nations, collateral damage. The tariff's ripple effects are global. India, dubbed the Tariff King by Trump, faces $7 billion in annual export losses, with 87% of its U.S. exports affected. Taiwan's 32% tariff threatens its semiconductor industry, critical to global tech supply chains. Vietnam and Cambodia, with 46% and 49% tariffs respectively, face economic strain as alternatives to Chinese manufacturing. Even small economies like Fiji fear being caught in a global trade war, with concerns about rising aluminum and steel costs. The EU, Japan, and South Korea, hit with 24 to 30% tariffs, are weighing retaliation, risking further escalation. The economic and political tightrope. Trump's tariffs walk a tightrope between economic ambition and political risk. Economists warn of a 0.7 to 1% hit to global GDP, with the US, Canada, and Mexico facing potential recessions. The US economy shrank in Q1 2025, and business sentiment is souring, with factory orders declining due to tariff uncertainty. The Federal Reserve's Jerome Powell has flagged risks of stagflation, while J.P. Morgan's Michael Farrelly predicts no rate cuts until September 2025, citing persistent unemployment. Politically, Trump's tariffs are divisive. His Republican base supports the America First agenda, but congressional leaders like Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell have urged narrower measures to avoid collateral damage. Democrats, like Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, call the tariffs reckless, accusing Trump of picking fights with allies instead of focusing on China. Public opinion is souring. A poll found 56% of Americans believe Trump's tariffs have gone too far, with his approval on jobs and the economy dropping to 41%. The internal chaos within Trump's administration doesn't help. The Navarro-Besant feud, Musk's public dissent, and Trump's own flip-flops, like the 90-day pause, undermine claims of a carefully plotted strategy. Comparisons to Liz Truss's short-lived UK premiership highlight the risks of market turmoil and policy reversals. Yet, Trump's grip on his base and his willingness to defy legal and market constraints suggest he may double down, regardless of the cost. The future, a new trade order or global recession. As of July 16, 2025, the world is in a phony war stage, with tariffs paused for many countries until August 1. The next 6 months will be critical. If Trump secures favorable trade deals, his tariffs could be hailed as a masterstroke, forcing concessions and boosting U.S. manufacturing. However, the risks are immense. A prolonged trade war could decimate global growth, disrupt supply chains, and alienate allies, while higher consumer prices and market volatility could erode Trump's political capital. The World Trade Organization, already weakened by U.S. actions, faces an existential crisis. The EU and China are exploring ways to preserve a rules-based trade system without the U.S. But their success is uncertain. For now, Trump's tariffs have reshaped the global economic order, but whether they lead to American greatness or global chaos remains an open question. As economist Lawrence Summers quipped, "Never before has an hour of presidential rhetoric cost so many people so much." In the end, Trump's tariff plan is a high-stakes gamble. Its genius lies in its audacity, disrupting a system many agree is flawed. Its chaos lies in its unpredictability, risking economic pain for uncertain gains. The world holds its breath, waiting to see if Trump's art of the deal will triumph or unravel.